I believe you once said to Leslie Nielsen, "I will never let you do anything that isn't funny." How could you make such a promise?
Well, I promised Leslie that I'll never make you do anything that isn't funny, and I can make that promise because, if something wasn't funny that he did and it didn't get a laugh, it was out of the movie. So I can make that promise easy. And the other aspect of that is that I remember the first table read for Naked Gun. Priscilla Presley was very nervous and said, I don't know how to be funny. And I said, don't worry, you don't have to be funny. Just let the lines do the work. And I've said that to many actors and actresses since then. I just said, don't ever try to be funny. Just let the lines do the work. It's when somebody tries to clown and be funny that it gets into trouble.
Why don't you like to cast comedians in your movies?
Oh, we have a rule that we do in MASTERCRASH, the 15 rules, called Jerry Lewis. So, and it doesn't mean that we especially don't like Jerry Lewis, but we don't need comedians, and that's the whole thing. It was easier to do Airplane without having to put in an expensive actor like Chevy Chase at the time, who's wonderful, or Bill Murray, who's wonderful, or later Jim Carrey. These are great comic actors, Robin Williams, but they don't belong in our movies because the actors have to be just completely serious. So that's why we never have a comedian. It's kind of the Uberization of comedy. You don't have to be a skilled taxi driver to know every address and all this stuff and have to communicate with a dispatcher. All you need is a license and a cell phone and with Waze on it, and you can drive anywhere. So, and this is with our actors. You don't need to be. Robert Stack didn't have to be funny. Leslie Nielsen didn't have to be funny. Not Bob Hayes or Julie Haggerty either. And we just, they let the lines do the work.
Can you explain why it's so important for actors to play their lines straight?
Well, it's the rule. Rule number one in our MASTERCRASH is joke on a joke. And if an actor would try to be funny, that would be a joke on a joke. I mean, the line as we wrote it is the funny element. And so all Leslie Nielsen has to do is just be earnest and sincere and serious. And he says, I am serious, and don't call me Shirley. And that's all we needed for the laugh. You don't need Jim Carrey, bless his heart, to be, I am serious, and don't call me, that's a joke on a joke.
Right.
So I think that explains it.
Okay, great.
I actually explained that pretty well. Yes.
I think you did.
Yes.
And going back to another thing we've talked about was you love having an actor say a line and then after a beat, kind of visually showing what was said. Example, nice Beaver in Naked Gun.
All Leslie said in that joke is nice Beaver, and then we got the laugh, and he just kept looking up there, and she hands him the beaver, and she said, oh, thank you, I just got it stuffed. So, and the audience never heard that line because the laugh was so long. But one example that we did with Leslie that I always loved this joke is when he shoots his own car and it catches fire and rolls over a fire hydrant. And he said, does anybody get the license plate number? And you can see in his face that he's realizing that he shot his own car. And the audience really appreciates being in on that joke, and they're getting it. It's not spoon-fed to anybody, but you know what's going on in his mind. He says, I have to get back to the office. And he goes in. It's a wonderful gag because of that.
And it gathers steam. There's a crowd forms, and yeah.
Yeah, and then there's other gags that just keep building. That there are 7 jokes on a page. Like when Matt Stone and Trey Parker are trying to save the kid in the hospital. And it's just a wonderful, that's that, flywheel of building laugh on a laugh and a laugh. And they're pounding the kid's chest and trying to, and we did a similar scene in Scary Movie 3 where Anthony Anderson is trying to save the dead body, and he gets up on the casket at the funeral and it collapses, and we just kept going. And that stuff, we were kind of winging it on the set, and I didn't stick exactly to the script, but we wrote it into the script later. And Bob Weinstein was concerned because we were going overtime, and I think Craig Mason called him and said, "Don't worry, David has it all handled. He's making it up on the set." So it made it fun.
Well, I think you did that as well in Airplane with the hysterical woman.
Right, we built in Airplane the gag. It was only supposed to be just Leslie and the stewardess and the nun shaking the hysterical woman. But she suggested, why don't you have them slap me? So we did that. And then somebody else suggested, why not have other people waiting in line with guns and knives? So we sent the prop lady out to get all those props. And that was a gag that was built and has become a meme now. Just like Leslie in front of the exploding fireworks factory saying, "Nothing to see here, please disperse, nothing to see here." That you see that all the time.
I believe your goal is to write 3 jokes a minute to keep people laughing. Does this mean you have to have 3 jokes, let's say, for every page of your screenplay?
Our goal is not to write 3 jokes per minute. What that came from is it just came out that way. And you can go back and there may be 2 jokes on a page, rarely 1 joke, because what we want to do is keep the audience laughing. So everything is either a setup or a punchline. And that's just the way it works out. And that came from our Kentucky Fried Theater show. Back in the 70s, we hated being on stage when the audience wasn't laughing. So we just kept the pace going. And so we found it also that it was easier to keep an audience laughing than to start them up from scratch. So that's where the pace came from.
Everything has to be a joke or a setup to a joke. Why is this important?
The reason, everything has to be a joke or a setup to a joke because of what I said about pace, and that keeps the pace. There's no, there was a movie called Spies Like Us with Chevy Chase and Dan Aykroyd, and there were some really funny bits in it, but there were whole 5-minute segments where they were just doing serious stuff. And in a comedy like that, and that's a zany, silly comedy, I thought you just had to keep the pace going.
Well, for a 90-minute movie, though, can you really get the audience to laugh, let's say, 270 times?
Well, not in a 90-minute movie, but in an 80-minute movie. Comedies shouldn't be longer than 80 minutes. You can absolutely get them to laugh, the 3 jokes a page 300 times or something, if the story is strong. And the stronger the story, the less the movie has to rely on the jokes. So, and this is what I said about the Farrellys, that they are very good at that. Although they're not really doing spoof. Neither are Stone and Parker in South Park. But Stone and Parker always make sure to put a kind of a moral in the story and a purpose to what they're doing in each South Park episode. So it makes the jokes easier for them to do and that much more effective.
How common is 3 jokes a minute today in current?
Well, there are very few spoof movies. There are very few spoof movies being done, and that's where you really get that pace and the 3 jokes a minute thing. And so nobody's really doing that, and I don't know if anybody is even trying it, because it takes a strong story and it takes knowing the rules to actually pull that off.
Which of your movies would you say get the most laughs?
For pure laughs, I would say BASEketball and Top Secret get the most laughs. I mean, it's just, they have the most jokes. It's, you know, I did another movie called An American Carol, and I saw that recently, and I didn't remember it being that funny, but it is so funny. I was laughing so hard for the whole thing. And that had a lot of jokes in it. But it depended on character and story, so we didn't need, there was not really 3 jokes a page in that one.
When is it where you have too many jokes? At what point does it get to be where we're being peppered with too much clever or should be funny moments?
Sometimes there are too many jokes, but usually it's because people aren't following the plot. If the jokes overshadow the plot, like this happened a lot in Top Secret, and I think that people wanted to root for Val Kilmer's character, and since we didn't give him one, the second half became mainly a joke book, and it wasn't as effective as Airplane, where there was a real rooting interest for Bob Hayes to overcoming his PTSD. And in BASEketball, the same thing happened. In the second half, it became more of a joke book because I don't think the characters of Coop and Reamer, their problems were realistic enough and emotional enough for the audience to hang on to. We needed more. So, I mean, these are all things I figured out later, and I use them as, you know, as lessons. And this is kind of a little bit outside of the rules. The rules are mainly about jokes, but in subsequent master crashes, I'll probably talk about the importance of character in these things because, and you know, actually Pete and Bobby Farrelly know that, they know that really well. In Something About Mary, it was all about character, and so they didn't need as many jokes. And Pete Farrelly said, great comedy puts an arrow through the heart. And I thought, God, this kid that, you know, idolized Airplane and The Naked Guns is teaching me something. So, and that's great. And also, he was one of the original BASEketball players. And by the way, he loves the script to Star of Malta, and wanted to sign on as executive producer. So I was very flattered by that.
And that's a film that you've been working on for a few years?
It's a script that we've had for many years, and it's film noir, great story. You know, we really paid attention to character, and it's set in 1949, and we're actually making progress. We're about to do it. We've just about raised the money, and that'll be my next movie.
Thank you for watching the video all the way to the end. Here is a complimentary question from our book Story Questions.